back.
Welcome back. Our first conversation of the morning is with our good friend who's no stranger to Open Your Eyes. He's all the way over at Nova Southeastern University. Good morning, Dr. Williams.
Good morning, Isani. Good morning, April. How are you both doing?
We are doing well.
We are
Thank
okay,
you.
notwithstanding our present circumstances.
I initially had asked Dr. Williams to just rip off the Band-Aid and give us the bad news, but he is currently saying that the data shows that it's just going to be the exact same. So good morning, Dr. Williams. And for those of you at home that don't really know Dr. Williams, he is the chair of Finance and Economics Department at Nova Southeastern University. And of course, he is our own personal economist for OIE. So, Doc, can you shed some light on the overall performing GDP of 2022 and how that is going to be predicted into 2023?
Welcome and thank you very much for having me again. As you said, Isani, I'm becoming familiar and popular with your channel, and you are aware I do this for different channels in Belize, as well as I do it for PBS. But I'm straight out of PG, Isani, and I lived in Belmopan a long time, and I still talk Creole.
Good. That means that you don't lose it.
No. I speak proper English when I need to. This is Creole is another language by definition. But let me tell you something before we jump in. I will always do what I like to do, and I think you'll like it this morning. So make us see if I could do something that's really cool. And I think you'll know this song, and I want to see if you're able to talk about heritage and think so. Listen to this. See if you can get this in. Let's see if you work. You don't look like you want to work today.
What are you going to sing for us? Good morning, Miss Lady.
I think he
yes,
wants.
sir. You got it right.
I may know we may do that.
But I don't got to sing it. I mean, why you sing it? But
oh no, you have a better singing voice than Isani and I do.
All right. Well, let me do it and see if it can work after the break.
All right.
Let's close it.
All right.
All right. Let's go.
As we move in, you're here to talk to us about the forecast for 2023. But before we get into that prediction, can you give us a little bit of insight on the total performance of 2022, a year review, if you would?
Okay, no. A year review is a very tough concept because you're looking at the year review for the world, Belize, the US, and when we look at this, let me give you a global view first. The present challenges that we're facing is that we've been facing a global inflation that is really high, and it is causing us a lot of pain, and it's because of all the geopolitical challenges of the world. Inflation has become, like in the US, the last number, it went down a little bit, is 7.3. Global inflation was 4.7 in 2021. 22 is expected to be 8.8 when we tally the numbers for 22, but it's expected to go down to about 6.5 in 2023 globally. But when you add all the countries and average it, that's kind of what you're getting. So do you see that inflation is high? Right now it's 7.3. Belize is around 6 plus somewhere. At least that's the official number. But where it's going to go next year, it's probably going to stay flat. And then possibly in 24, we'd expect to see it go down. However, the challenges of the world are going to determine that. And I have to tease because inflation can change almost on a weekly basis.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you see how the world is changing. So the biggest one right now is we had all of the challenges with COVID. We put in a lot of money in, a lot of countries put money in to help their people, the US especially. So you have two kinds of inflation, demand pull and cost push. And two of them are working. Demand pull means people had a lot of extra money over here, so they want to buy things that they weren't getting. And after COVID, everybody's excited. They want to go shopping, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a component of it. But the growth rate for the world is expected to, it was around 3, it's dropping to 2.7, and globally, that might even get to 2%. So it's not going to go down to zero for globally. You see, globally is a very big phrase, but the US is expected to average out 1% this year in growth, and they expect next year to be 1 or less. So we're just going to hold it steady. So steady means we don't like the word steady when we're looking about growth. What do we want to see? Increases, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's the challenge we're facing. So we're going to be flat or a little bit lower. So they refer to it as a mild recession. But it has implications. And the implication is that you have to be a better manager of your business,
Finances.
your finances. Government has to keep an eye on things. So that's kind of where I wanted us to get that. The world has some forces. By the way, do not take your eye off the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
No.
The reason is clear that Ukraine was a major supplier of the fertilizers and it impacts agriculture, but it's also the conflict there with the oil, because with Russia is a major exporter of oil, but with everything going on, they are having lots of, well, political trade, if you want to call it. They don't want to trade with certain people because of the war. So when you add that, then our major one is China. Do you see what's happening in China with the COVID and lockdown
measures? Yes.
Supply chain issues going to kick up again if the Chinese don't get back to work. So it's a lot of geopolitical. The pandemic is not over yet for all of us. I think last week you had a few more cases in Belize. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
So I don't want people to believe that pandemic is over. We're tired of it. We don't wear the masks often, but just also be careful. If you see somebody coughing a lot, just take it easy and keep away, and so on. So if you look at all the geopolitical forces, the pandemic is still around. And when you look at that, but the biggest one is inflation, and that's the hardest nut to crack, especially for Belize, right?
Right. So when
You know why? Go ahead.
Right, go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, the reason why it's hard for us, and I said this a few times already, is because we import most of the inflation. Because we import so many goods, we import oil. And I always make a very sweeping statement. You guys know it. Oil prices impact everything.
Yes, they do.
Need to digest that phrase globally. So we need to manage the oil prices. And I'll tell you, fuel prices is the engine of growth. And if you have I know our country, and I've been there from the time I was an economist and at the marketing board, the government has a sizable tax on fuel. And I've always made the statement, any government in our country, it's such a nice source of revenue, but it has a stifling effect on development and competitiveness for the world. So when you blend it all, it really needs some eye-opening and really visionary way of managing the tax base, because if you tax the fuel too much, then all that cost is passed on to the consumers, and your buying power gets what?
Yeah, goes down. Diminishes.
Goes down. So you see, it ties in. So we have global inflation impacting us nearly everything. Then with the minimum wage that we were talking about just before, if minimum wage goes from $3.30 on up to $5,
yeah.
That's an automatic increase in the cost of everything. I mean, people will make a little more money. So those who do not get a raise, that's kind of like an inflation indirectly hit right there, because things will go up because you have to pay people more. So like public officers, if they don't get a raise, or if you work in a company that doesn't give a raise, then you gotta be a little bit poorer in terms of buying power. Yeah. You get all those pieces. You with me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I want you to see that there are local forces and there are global forces, but the global forces are way bigger. And that's the scary part of a large country effect and a small country effect. You know, the large country like China and the US, when something happens there, it impacts the world.
Yes.
When anything happens in Belize, it doesn't impact too many people, only us.
When it comes to the expense and the want of things, and I just say things because I'm not talking about day-to-day products that we need. I'm talking about the excessive want of just material stuff, that wanting of stuff, and why we basically go on like a binge spree when we spend our money because we want to be able to have access to certain things. How are we basically moving away from that type of culture now that we're kind of going into this recession? We can no longer really afford to just go on Amazon and say, all right, I want this
But
new
people still
gadget.
are, though.
People still are, and we
People
can't
are doing some-
afford it. So then how are we how are we balancing this financial rut that we're going into?
Doc, can I argue before you respond? Can I argue
Sure.
that? Can I argue that the culture of consumerism, where people, for whatever reason,
Want
are
things.
so materialistic that in the face of a recession in this case, the fact that you have a line of credit, and in some cases an open line of credit, people continue to buy, people continue to purchase items that they want or they don't want. Is that fair to say?
You know, the psychology of the human being in expenditure, it is, you're right on target. We are a now people globally. And so we not to worry about future 6 months down the road. I want happiness now.
Right.
Precisely.
And it is a real phenomenon that's hard to deal with. So even though I'm telling you, beware, don't spend all the money. You know, we have Christmas and all the holidays coming up, and we could talk a little bit about how inflation impacts Christmas, because it does. But in the meantime, people say, look, I want to have a good holiday, and I'll do what it takes to get that one day and have a great party or a few days. And then you have to have MAGA season in January and maybe even to February and further down the road. But it's a human thing. It's global.
Yeah.
That we like to have things now. And consumerism is not going to stop. The control of consumerism is if there's no money. And when we don't have money, what do? We borrow.
We credit.
Right.
So
Credit.
and
And you go further in debt.
So here's the thing, right? So if in the United States, Thanksgiving is such a big thing for them, and then you have Black Friday and Cyber Monday, that is apart from the height of the travel season for them. So
Yes.
some people go out of their way to make sure that they have money, whether it's borrowed, whether it's their own money, whatever it is, they spend a lot during that time. It's the same way for us here in Belize, where Christmas is everything. So it doesn't matter if we take out loans, it doesn't matter if it's our savings that we're drawing from, we're still spending.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding the fact that there is in fact an inflation that's taking place.
You know, Sani and April, that's just the human behavior. And by the way, you are talking about traditions at Christmas. Christmas is a big deal for us in Belize. I remember as a young man, and I was talking to one of my friends, George Murray, how we used to take those chairs and scrape them with pine bottle and varnish them, and that varnish smell in the house at Christmas is so nice, right? You have some newness,
Fresh
some
oil.
Fresh
cleansing,
paint, fresh varnish.
fresh varnish, fresh paint. But some of that is really good because it's like a cleaning of the house, new linoleum and new everything. And then you have all the festivities. So there's some healing with that. But if you have to borrow through your nose and you can't pay back for 3 years, that's a real concern in my books. I came up with some numbers and said that if you could only afford to pay back $100 a month, not gonna borrow $2,000 because it take you roughly 2 years to pay it back with interest.
Right.
That means you got 2 more Christmas where you have to borrow on top of borrow and borrow, make no sense.
But
So I like say go to maybe six months to 9 months, no more, what you could afford, and then borrow that much. But don't go over borrow unless you have some major, like an anniversary of 50 years or something where you say you want to really go big and you want to pay back. I'll give you the optimism now, because remember you have an optimism group that come behind.
okay.
We have very big optimism about borrowing. Oh, I could pay that back right now. Don't worry, man. Lend me the money. And when they lend you the money, they can't pay back. The
Right.
bank will have that challenge. Your family will have that trouble. But when they need it for a party or whatever they need it for, they come up with 100 reasons how they can pay you back this time and that time. But the psychology of money is not symmetric. Borrowing and pay back, they're not the same thing.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Borrowing is easy. You're going with your pretty face and you're going with all kind of things. And then when
is a
time
headache.
comes, exactly, when you go back and pay, that's a whole different animal, you know. So people need to keep this in mind. And the advice, I guess, over the Christmas season is if there's a little recession coming over the next year, still have a good Christmas. Still go out and enjoy your Christmas. but don't go way overboard and borrow so much that you end up having a rough time next year, in addition to paying back your loan and well as trying to survive another period that might be hard. Right now, everybody happy because the tourists are coming, right?
Right.
But then tourists will also feel the pinch next year, and they may not be coming in that many numbers. We don't know that yet, because tourism, if we only have 1% in the United States, where most of our tourists come from, they might still be coming in. But tourism is only 30% of the GDP of Belize, so we need to look into agriculture and all the other parts to make sure that they're doing well. Make sure they're doing well. So you'll see it's like a dance of many pieces, right?
Yeah.
It's like 15 people that try to dance and stay together. It's not easy.
But somebody owes somebody, right? So you could borrow as much from the bank as you are allowed, but the bank also owes somebody. So what would happen if the bank goes in debt?
Tell you what, the bank is basically a lender of people's money. And so they get money from deposits, and they promise them a certain amount. I would say how much, not too high. And then they turn around and lend it to people who need it. And that's the banking structure. So there's a spread. The spread in Belize is around 7%, that's how the banker makes its money. And the bank is not forcing you to come in and borrow that money. It's your psychology and your happiness driving you. You want to have a big party. And that big party, if you could afford it, please do it. But if you are stretching so thin and you barely have money for food next year, then you should have a good meal, enjoy your family. And by the way, holiday and Christmas, we're a Christian society. A holiday and Christmas is about Thanksgiving and giving back to your family and acknowledging what they've done for you. And
Doc,
we like to do it in gifts, right?
Here's my philosophy, Doc, a humble one at that.
Let's hear it.
So if we, as Belizeans, have this expression where we say, you have to owe for own, right? I don't see that there's anything wrong with that idea unless you're using that money for the wrong purposes other than what you borrowed it for. So for instance, if you're borrowing money to purchase property or perhaps to purchase a vehicle or what have you, the idea that not many of us are entrepreneurs and have our own businesses and what have you, we need to be able to access certain funds. So we're borrowing to be able to put an addition on the house, or like I said, to purchase a vehicle or what have you. Perhaps that's a meaningful purpose for borrowing the money, because you're investing it in something that helps you to either build equity down the road, or you could say, you know what, at the end of the day, this is mine and it increases in value or what have you. It's the idea that when people go into the bank or to the credit union or whichever lending institution, and then they borrow certain sums of money, but they're not religious to either the objective of the borrowing, or they're not religious to paying back. That's when it becomes an issue.
Absolutely, Sonny. I'll tell you, borrowing is the foundation of a capitalist society. You do not, it's hard to create wealth without using other people's money. In fact, even if you, like any one of us, you would have to go borrow to own a house, and it'll take you 20 or 30 years, but after you finish, you own that property. And that is a foundation of finance that we teach everybody. That if you don't have the equity, or you don't have any rich family to have you some money, you have to borrow, but borrow responsibly and for the right reason. What I don't want is you go borrow to build a house, and you take 20,000, go buy one radio set or a television set. We don't got nothing to do with the structure of the house, and then you can't finish the house. And that's you're so on the money, and we teach that every day. And I want Belizeans to remember that if you lend, the banks are smart lately. They used to give you phase 1 money, phase 2 money, phase 3 and 4, because they know some of that behavior happens. If you get the foundation and not give for wall, it makes no sense.
Go ahead.
No, so the point of that is called responsible borrowing, and that's what I am proposing. I will never discount the point of borrowing. Borrowing is the foundation of our society. You can nearly look at 9 out of 10 people who have created wealth. They did not only do it from their own money. They had to borrow from the bank primarily. And this is a global phenomenon. In the US, a lot of the wealthy folks, if you watch how they got wealthy, they have some equity. they use equity from other people, but they also use the banking system in the hundreds of millions. Nothing is wrong with borrowing. In fact, I endorse borrowing, but how you do it? Responsibly, and you have to have a discipline, because the bank will have to have no choice. What's the choice? You
I'm
have
laughing. I'm
and your
laughing. Yeah, I'm laughing because there are some of us in society who are seemingly allergic to borrowing, right?
No.
It's either because we don't have the self-control or the sense of responsibility to paying back, or perhaps we've had previous instances where it didn't really turn out good, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so because of that, we have a natural fear or a trepidation when it comes to even borrowing the smallest sums of money. We shy away
want to
from the
do it.
banks or the credit unions. And then you look at it though, those institutions are there for a reason. It's on you, the individual, to know what you're going to do with the money. And it's up to you, the individual, to know that it's not money that was given to you. You owe that, and you have to pay it back. If not, then you go through this whole legal process and everything that's more headache than what you need.
Isani and April, borrowing is part of what we ask people to do. When you're a teenager, they want you to practice borrow a few $100s and pay back on a teenager credit card you co-sign with your parent. That practice and learning how to borrow is vital. Now, I must warn you that everything is easy when you're talking about it, but the reality is that people do make these mistakes, and there's a percentage you can't stop. There are external factors, but you have some deliberate abuse of the credit system, and then they get into a lot of trouble, and you see their properties on sale and so on.
Yeah.
So it's not a straightforward thing, but with this present economic environment, I would recommend that people be more cautious with borrowing only for parties. I would say if you're going to borrow for a house, I would still do it. If you're going to borrow for a business, because a business is for 4 or 5, for many years. So even if you have a little recession and you have to build something, you will get through it.
Yeah.
But if you have to just borrow for only having a great time and say, well, tomorrow will never come, that's not a good approach for going into a recession. In a sense, you need a cushion of a few more months of money. And this is hard because few people could ever have 5 months of extra money to pay bills, but we usually say 6 months is a good mark. But nobody, even in the United States, have 6 months of cushion. They usually have 1 month or so. And that's why you hear the phrase paycheck to paycheck or hand to mouth, no?
Yeah.
It's a tough call.
Yeah, when it comes to in line of borrowing and kind of going into this 2023, this global recession will probably cause jobs to be lost. And even if you already have a loan during COVID and so forth, you had to dip into those savings to pay off your loan because you were probably already out of a job or no longer had the capability to retain a particular amount of income per month. So going into this 2023, what would be the hypothesis or the possible outcome for job maintenance?
Yeah, in our country, a lot of people are hired by government. So, you're hoping that government will be the last one to consider laying people off because they're the backstop of a society.
Yeah.
The private sector is going to do just like before. If they see a shortage, they may have to slow down. And this is where, remember the phrase long time ago, who moved my cheese? A book was written with that topic. And that topic is just to keep an eye on your cheese. And the best way to do that is to have a little cushion, because if a company says, well, I'm not selling enough, then say, the thing about Belize is that we import so much, so it's the merchants that are selling us a lot of things. So if you don't have a job, can you get another one very easily? It's not very easy. And so we need to expand the pie, but the pie would be hard to expand in a recessionary period. So it's kind of like hunker down, right? How do you hold what you have? And there are little things that I would like to say. Individuals got certain things to do. Government has certain things to do. Private sector has certain things to do. So you have to hit them. The individual is, you need to be astute with your management. And that's what we were talking about for the last several minutes, right? Watch how much you borrow. Keep an eye on your money. Do not. But the private sector also has to have a cushion. If they make a lot, you're in the tourism industry, and this December to January, you made a lot of money. you need to keep some because we don't know what will happen next year. You may not get the same number. Don't assume that this December will be the same as next year when I'm telling you that the data seems to show that it's going to be flat. So at least hold on to some extra part of the profits and have it for rainy day. Business got rainy day too, not only so, and the last one, the government got rainy day too. Government needs to also have a cushion of money to say that if we go into a recession, I will find a way how to help the focus on the most needed part of the society, and that ties it down to the less fortunate. And so they need to have some programs to help those who cannot help themselves when a recession is kind of on the horizon, not a bad one. But also strategically, governments have to be aware of what I'm saying and say, you know what, maybe next year, about first quarter, second quarter, we might see a reduction in the growth of our society. How are we going to keep the pieces together? That's the kind of discussion that has to go on at cabinet and go on at high places in the country and share it with the people to encourage them, just as I'm doing right now. Please manage your money well. Don't go overboard with the Christmas spending. But I like that you have some enjoyment because Christmas is about appreciating one another and provide gratitude to one another, and that make you have remember the history of Christmas, right? Christmas is a very important. I use Christmas here in the United States. We have to say happy holidays because of the many religions and so on.
Right.
But in Belize, I'm going to be a little less careful, but I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm trying to say that this is a season of festivity. We should link it to Christ, and we do. Many we go to midnight mass, and I think the priests like us when we go because we full the church, and he not see you long time, so the service get longer.
Once a year congregation.
And he makes sure that our give leave it because might come back till next year. But that's a funny spiritual joke.
Well, Dr. Williams, as we are wrapping up our session for this morning, 2023, we're not going to be super depressed. We're not going to be super optimistic. We're basically hoping to be riding around that same flat line that we have in 2022, correct?
That is the forecast globally. That's the forecast for Belize, for the United States. And I'll tell you, flat is good. So I'm optimistic. All right.
I hope that we can continue to share in that optimism with you, Dr. Williams. Thank you so much for coming in, tuning in, and of course, always being able to make yourself available to share your extensive economic knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much too, and it's always a pleasure to be with you guys. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll talk again.
Same to you, my brother. Take care.
Merry Christmas.
All right. Bye-bye.
With that, we are going to take our next break, and we'll be back with, I guess, the Optimist Club of Belize. You don't want to miss that conversation. Stay tuned.